Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us for our first ever reproductive justice session to be held at the EJ Symposium. Today, our topic is the womb as our first environment, where we will be connecting some of the concepts of the reproductive justice movement, the birth justice movement, as well as the environmental justice movement among a beautiful group of diverse speakers. Before we get started with introductions, I just wanted to take a little bit of a moment to share some grounding information for those of you who generally do EJ work, but maybe don't necessarily see that linkage directly with reproductive justice. The main thing I wanted to share is the distinction between reproductive justice and reproductive rights, because we're going to be hearing a lot about that. Some people may have heard that on their TV last night. You're going to be hearing that term thrown around. But this is not a trend, this is not new, and it's nothing to be weaponized. The reproductive justice movement is a movement that was founded by 10 women of African descent who came together in Chicago in 1994 to build a reproductive justice framework that ties in human rights, that ties in social justice and racial justice movement, that ties in what Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw has coined as intersectionality, as well as the culture and politics of the time in the 1990s and before. And as the incomparable Loretta J. Ross, one of the founders of the reproductive justice movement, would define it as, reproductive justice is the complete physical, mental, spiritual, political, social, and economic well being of women and girls based on the full achievement and protection of women's human rights. Now, I know that there is, in our modern society, much more inclusive terminology around gender. And so I do want to ensure that we consider the entire um, lifespan of reproductive wellness, and that reproductive safety and wellness is not just for girls and women, but also for people of all gender representations, as well as for the community at large. So, with that grounding information, I think I'll make one other brief comment and then I'll turn it over to intros and we can get started. For all of us that work in the environmental justice movement, we can also kind of parallel that to how people say environmentalism and environmental justice, and they use those they use those in tandem, but we also know that those are not the same thing. When you discuss environmentalism and you're talking about kind of safeguarding and a monitoring sense of environmental wellness and safety, that's very different than taking into account disparities of burden, as well as weaponizing exposures, and of course, other environmental contexts such as, historical contexts such as redlining and other issues that have put communities of color in closer proximity to environmental harms. So I just wanted to kind of make that alignment, give a little historical background. But of course, today is not about me. Today is about these beautiful experts around me. And so, really briefly, we will go around and I can pass the mic first to Zija, who will introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Zainab Jah, also go by Z, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm currently based in Silver Spring, Maryland. I am a senior research analyst with formerly Reproductive Health Impact and now the Praxis Project. My identities inform the way in which I show up in my work. I am a daughter of an immigrant. My father's from Sierra Leone. My mom's from Puerto Rico. I'm Muslim, and I grew up in the South. So all those little identities and lived experiences inform the way in which I show up and do this work. And excited to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Z. So, the next few folks to introduce yourselves will have Lourdes and then Tiana and then Dr. Des.
Hi, everybody. Good morning from where I am. I don't know if we're in different parts of the world. My name is Lourdes Santavalla. I am located in Dorado, Puerto Rico. I work with an organization called Alimentación Segura Infantil. Our acronym is ASI. And as I was telling people earlier, I just think this is like a kind of funny technically in Spanish, it's supposed to be alimentación infantil segura. So like in English, instead of being safe infant feeding, it would be infant safe feeding. But I always say that así sounded cooler than ICE when we were founded. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, or IBCLC, and I have been for 12 years. I'm a community-based doula. I'm a mother of two adolescents who I breastfed for way too much time. I like to say that I'm the CrossFit of breastfeeding because I tandem fed and I weaned them both the day before my daughter's 8th birthday. And you don't have to do that. Although I do think that, and I'm going to talk about it more, that breastfeeding is a food security issue and it's also an economic, environmental justice issue. Uh, ASI was founded in 2017 after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and we'll talk more about that. But when we were founded, a lot of lactation in Puerto Rico was very professionalized, and a lot of this sort of like helping people, a very, I would say, like civic housewife sort of mentality. And we really looked to create an organization that integrated gender inclusive language, which is very difficult in the binary language like Spanish, and also to make sure that we recognize that even though Puerto Rico is supposedly a very homogeneous society, that we're not. We have racial color, gender, economic diversity, and sadly, a lot of the crises that we are going through, as in many places, are related to this imbalance of power. I'm not going to go too much into it, but the reason that I started doing this work was because I became a mother, because I had worked in other fields, and I am above all an activist. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tiana Shaw Wakeman. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the privilege of serving as the Environmental Justice Program Manager at a Black women led and founded organization called Black Women for Wellness, which is based in Los Angeles, California. We are on a mission to support the health and well being of Black women and girls, and we are a reproductive justice human rights organization. We were founded in 1997, so kind of in the wave and really rooted in the history that was shared about how the reproductive justice movement got started in Chicago. My executive director and founder was born and raised in Chicago. And we built our environmental justice program for a lot of the reasons that were shared because of the intersectionality of the entire reproductive justice framework. And I'll talk a little bit about that later, but it is really exciting to be in a space with RJ and EJ folks all connected because these spaces are not that common, unfortunately, but I feel like they're becoming more and more common, and it is so needed for all of the reasons that you shared, but also because as we are looking more into the future, as we are better understanding our past, it is becoming so important that we all connect the work that we're doing in order to make progress together because we need these united fronts. We need to be solving root issues in order for us to actually make the changes that are needed. So it's really exciting to be here, and thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Dr. Desiree Smith. I'm actually calling from Nairobi, Kenya, because currently I'm a University of Michigan Minority Health Research Training postdoctoral fellow. I originally got my Doctor of Public Health from Mercer University. I spend much of my time doing program management, evaluation, and then, of course, implementation research. Everything to me is involved in reproductive justice, including environmental justice, and I can't see the two being separated. So I often seek out and try to make space for an add to that so that everyone can understand how they're interrelated, of course, with racism and things like that, and how, as Kiana said before, we're using our past to inform our future. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I'm really, really excited to talk with you all today.
Thank you so much. And Shantae, you can close out our introductions and then I'll do mine last and we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Shantae Traham Smith. I am the owner of YOLO. YOLO means you overcoming lactation obstacles. I live in Genesee County, Flint, Michigan. I've lived here for over 20 years, but I'm a Detroit girl through and through, born and raised, West Side, if you wanted to know. But my work with YOLO is centered around supporting Black and Brown families. I have several grants right now where families can have lactation services for free. So I'm a lactation consultant and a doula. So lactation services are for free for families in Genesee County, regardless of their ability to pay. It's not an income guideline for that. I also just received funding for postpartum doula services and postpartum kits for families. So I'm very excited about the funding opportunities that Yellow has and the movement that we are doing here in Flint.
I am so grateful for everybody's introductions and giving context to the roots of why you do what you do, why you're an expert, and most importantly, bringing your city and your community on your back, because that's always the type of conversations I like to have. As you all know, I am Vanessa Amandla Owetu Vassal. I have been a maternal and infant health epidemiologist pretty much my entire career, but as of the past 7 or so years, really dove deep into how I could leverage that as a part of the birth justice movement and have become a birth worker and doula and primarily an educator surrounding birth justice topics and environmental justice. And that intersection is of importance to me so much that I'm so grateful that I was selected to be a fellow with the National Association to Advance Black Birth. And in my fellowship in developing additional community resources and programs around um, improving Black birth outcomes, in reducing those environmental exposures that contribute to morbidity and mortality among Black babies and Black mommies. And so that is my passion. That is why I'm allowed to moderate this session amongst such great minds. And so let's go ahead and get started. So I wanted to start with Z. You talked about your work at the Praxis Project and your expertise in reproductive justice. You have been working lately in really increasing awareness at that critical intersection of RJ and environmental justice, in particular climate as well. Please share a little bit about your work, and also, if you can, share some key info about current issues that intersect climate justice and reproductive justice for those who aren't familiar. I'm throwing it over to you.
For sure. Thank you, Vanessa. And you did a great job explaining the basis of RJ. And I think in recognizing how Sister Song defines it as having the personal bodily autonomy to have children, not have children in safe and sustainable environments, we clearly see the intersection there of RJ and EJ. A lot of my research centers on improving maternal health experiences and outcomes for Black birthing people transnationally. And I have gotten into the climate space, and I'm just having a blast and learning so much, and really excited to be able to come up with so many partnerships transnationally. Um, just a little tidbit of how climate change and environmental injustices impact pregnancy outcomes. We know currently the US specifically, there's a tax on bodily autonomy, reproductive autonomy, and there's a Black maternal health crisis as well. And we see how climate change and environmental injustices exacerbate those outcomes. It impacts access to care, it impacts um, working conditions, food security, access to clean water, it impacts breastfeeding, chest feeding. So it's really an intersectional approach that's really needed to really think about um, climate solutions with a birth equity lens. So a little bit of my work, I dabble in different subjects, but I do a lot of work on respectful maternity care within hospital systems and a lot of policy and advocacy. However, regarding climate change, as I mentioned, I'm trying to make more transnational connections because although experiences are so different in different regions, there's a lot of knowledge that can be shared across communities. And so, as I mentioned, how my identity greatly informs my work. In Sierra Leone, there's a wet and dry season, and I keep hearing from family and hearing about, climate events such as mudslides that it's getting hotter and the seasons are lasting longer and there's more flooding. And so I've had the opportunity to work alongside Mama Pekin Foundation in Freetown, Sierra Leone. And I'm actually going there in 2 weeks. Instead of doing traditional like focus group extractive type of research, we are showing up, we are talking about what climate change is, we are going to have lots of visuals, and we're just going to hear from them how it's impacting them, and then we're going to take that information and create a booklet to provide to communities and clinics, and then hopefully eventually partner with the Ministry of Health to do it more generally across the country. We're also doing it in Mumbai as well, which is a more rural area that's impacted by extreme heat. So I feel very excited to be able to make those connections because we recognize how climate is perceived differently in different areas. The US is a bit further with like connecting climate and health, but when I was able to do a few initial trips and just talk to people, get to know them, like they are just like, we don't have running water, we don't have electricity, we're doing C-sections with a phone flashlight. So this heat doesn't matter to me because it's always hot. But also, we see on our end how extreme heat leads to dehydration. We see how flooding leads to like more still water, which leads to increases in malaria, which then causes more negative birth outcomes. So on our end, we recognize that we want to be able to support with like basic needs that they have, but also be very proactive in the ways in which we can create guidance and protections for pregnant people because the climate crisis is getting worse. Some of the work I've done in Puerto Rico alongside Dr. Tyre Gross with Xavier University. I was able to meet with Centro Mom earlier this year when I went to Puerto Rico to visit some family, just to talk about their birthing clinic and talk about the ways in which they navigate hurricanes and how they support birthing communities. And then I talked a bit about birthmark doulas based in Louisiana. I'm wearing their shirt. I'll give a shout out later. Um, and just how they are providing resources and guidance to their communities. And so, through all of this, and I forgot in Sierra Leone to mention, traditional birth attendants and midwives are very heavily active in protecting their clients. And so, a lot of my research is uplifting birth workers as frontline climate workers, and recognizing that pregnant folks typically engage with their doula or lactation consultant a lot more than they do traditional providers. And they also have a deep connection with their community and understand the resources that are available and understand how the climate can impact their clients. And so a lot of my research is uplifting them and ensuring that we can get resources and funding over to birth workers to continue to do their work that they're doing, and also currently applying for a grant to create a doula training curriculum that could be integrated within existing curriculums. So doulas and birth workers have that information and training upfront to be able to integrate it within their work. So yeah, that's a little bit of what I do and how birth workers and birth justice and reproductive justice and EJ are just all interconnected.
And I really appreciate the fact that you developed your doula survey about this topic. And I don't know if you want to take a little moment to talk about that before we pass the mic to
Yes.
Shantae, because that was phenomenal.
There was so much happening this year. Yes, so earlier this year, I was able to work alongside Human Rights Watch to develop a doula survey. And what we did, we dispersed it nationally through our networks, and we were just asking doulas how they felt about climate change, if they're worried about climate change, how it's currently impacting their communities, and if they're interested in learning more. And across the board, people are concerned. They see the impacts on their communities. They want more money and resources, and they recognize there's a gap in training. We did this research as part of the March and Dimes Baby and Mommy Network Action Committee, EJ Action Committee, and it's on their website. I'm happy to share a link if you want to read the whole survey and report that we did. But it was just very glaring that there's a need, and that also helped inform me thinking through the doula curriculum and partnering with Metro Mommy Agency in Miami, Florida, Birthmark Doulas. And then we're also going to connect with some folks in Texas to really focus on the Gulf South for this grant and then hopefully expand larger out.
I appreciate that. I really wanted to highlight that because when we talk about this space, and also when we talk about environmental justice and environmental health, we don't often tap into birth workers as the experts, like you're saying, around the frontline experts, the folks that are seeing it and who also are addressing it based on the care that they're providing for families. And so for you to have done a national survey and to also get the voices of the doulas saying, we're already doing this and we want to learn more and we want our skills and our expertise to be enhanced. I just feel like we're a population that's underutilized for our expertise. But once again, that goes into a lot of other isms on whose voice is supposed to be the expert voice in these conversations. So I really appreciate you sharing, and I look forward to you sharing more on how folks can learn about all those projects. And someone else on our panel who is an amazing frontline birth worker in this work is Shantae, and I want to pass it to you to share the amazing work of YOLO, what's going on in Genesee County, all of the solutions that you bring to families based on a healthcare setting.
Yeah, so of course, unfortunately, Flint was very known over the past years for the water crisis and that situation, and to think of how it impacted families. So at the time, I was working for WIC, and the main focus was definitely like the lead exposure for pregnant persons, the lead exposures for the children as well. So making sure that pregnant people knew like, hey, like breast chest feeding is like the way for you to go right now. Especially if your child might have had some exposures. This could be a great way for you to feed your baby, and especially because the water was not safe to use for people to boil and then like give to their children. So really a lot of breastfeeding promotion was going on over the years, and definitely like promoting folks to get tested for their lead levels. Then moving forward, I tell people like all the time, because people say like, well, Flint has clean water now. People do not drink the water, like, and that's what people have to understand. And unfortunately, because of that, that people still don't trust it. You have to think of the harm that was done and the trust that communities thought they could have when you jacked up something as simple as water, all on a play for money, politically. And so there's no trust there, which is completely understandable. And because of that, people are drinking bottled water. And over the years, I learned more like, okay, I'm thinking like, if I'm drinking bottled water, I'm good. But then we thinking about the plastic. And then who can afford to have glass water, right? And so this is like a whole tumbleweed situation of like, this is already a community that might not have the resources to get certain things, and we just like stockpiling more and more issues onto them to like just have common basic needs of health. And so that has been like a focus over the years, to just try to educate people. You can say like, oh well, you can try to filter. These are still things that aren't being provided anymore in our community, and so that's still to me a financial barrier. You still asking people to provide for themselves financially for harm that's been done to them. So then you move forward, and I tell people like, you have to think, then you had COVID and how that impacted an already community that already had a lot of things going on for Black and brown folks. Then you take that, and then you also pile on the formula crisis. So it's like this community has been through so much, and to try to educate people, and then you start to see other birthing outcomes for Black and brown families, like the increased amount of hemorrhaging after birth, hemorrhaging to the part of hysterectomy or partial hysterectomy, ICU, just like more preeclamptic cases. Like, so really educating people in the importance of diet and them being able to utilize the resources that they have prenatally. And then also in the postpartum period, them getting the support that they need. You have to think of all the mental and physical stress that this community has gone through. And then also, like, this has been for like 10 years. Those like young children there now, like very much so reproductive age, and how that could impact them, and then the testing that they should still be going through, because of course once you get pregnant, and how lead can leach into the bones and all those things like that, we still need to be following up with care and empowering those birthing families to know to still ask for testing to make sure that it's being done.
Shantae, a really big part of what you shared, and something that I always get to hear you talk about is, and whether you say it directly or not, birth workers in your community are the trusted source of information. It is not the talking heads on the 9 o'clock news. It is not the research that comes out when nobody asked me. Who asked me? No one asked anyone I know. It is folks like you who are touching families, who are answering their questions, who are wiping their tears, who are kissing their babies, who are holding their hands. You are the folks who are, we are all the folks, but you specifically in this regard are the person that is the expert and also that is considering all of these other factors that these research papers do not consider. The things that you have shared about the lived experiences of your community, folks are no longer asking. They're no longer bringing up to the rest of the community and the rest of the country. It's quite unfortunate, and you said it yourself that your community has been forgotten by those who were doing press conferences and taking pictures and handing things out. And so, I just want to also further emphasize that concept of justice being a part of the healthcare and wellness of the work that you do and of the tenacity and perseverance of the families in your community. And so thank you for sharing that. And I look forward to additional comments from you as we continue this conversation. I want to pass it on to another community that is impacted greatly, and that is our beautiful brothers and sisters down in Puerto Rico. And Lourdes, take it away.
Okay. There's so much historical context about Puerto Rico that I think that a lot of people in the U.S. don't know. And I don't want this to be a history lesson, but I want you to understand that Puerto Rico was as an island. We're in the Caribbean. We're thousands of miles away from the U.S. We were initially colonized by Spain, who came and wiped out the indigenous population and then imported human beings to be enslaved and to perform labor, not very different from the United States. In during the Spanish American War in 1898, the United States won, and Spain gave, I guess it was like the war booty or it was the penalty. They gave the U.S. the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. The United States allowed Cuba and Philippines to become independent and decided to stick with Puerto Rico. And we are strategically located in the Caribbean as a place where I guess where warships and warplanes can land, although we were more militarized at one point. We have been the place where glyphosate, I think is the name, or now we know it as Roundup, but do you know what Agent Orange is? Agent Orange and Roundup are the same thing. Okay, if anyway, Agent Orange was first experimented in El Yunque rainforest in Puerto Rico, and we have a whole generation of elders who have cancers and have other health issues related to Roundup. And I'm gonna remember me to come to get back to Roundup because it's not over yet. We were also the site of where contraceptive hormonal birth control pills were experimented, and they were experimented primarily on residents of public housing. We also, not unlike Black and Indigenous populations in the US, were subject to coerced sterilization under false pretext. If you have the opportunity to see a film that they have on some of these video pages, La Operación, which is the operation. Here, sterilization is so common that you're pregnant with your second baby and everyone's like, you're going to get operated, right? And that means you're going to have a tubal ligation. And they did a very effective job because initially it was lies and they promised people food and they told people it was reversible. But at this point, many people, I think people still think it's reversible, but it's the most common birth control method. And then we have an economic crisis. Puerto Ricans are US citizens. We have one of the largest presences in the US military. There's a very large so we don't have the right to vote for US president, but we have the right to fight in your wars. And anyway, moving forward, we have had a history of corrupt governance. Right now I'm working as an election official, and I'm just surprised at how the history of stealing elections has actually been happening here, because of the way that the election, like how ballots are collected, and dead people vote here. And we have had a lot of people die in the past 5 years, and we've had people leave. But so we have an economic crisis where perhaps the past 30 years we've had a lot of young people of reproductive age leave the island. We also had the Zika crisis, and that was about 2015, 2016. And the official government policy at that time was don't have babies. So there was a what I would say is like a chemical sterilization that was happening at the time. Wasn't necessarily sterilization, but it was long-term contraceptive, and everybody was being given that. You could just, anywhere that you went just to get a pap smear, just because your child had a cold, they would say, hey, you can get the IUD for free. You were pregnant, you just gave birth in the hospital, and they would try to put the implant under your arm or the shot. And even though progesterone only birth control methods are not supposed to interfere with lactation, we know that some people are sensitive. And I always tell people, if you're considering long-term hormonal contraception, do just 1 month with the pills to see how your supply goes, because you could be one of those people. But that's not giving it, hey, we'll give you a month of pills, and if that goes well, we're going to give you the shot. No, it's like, we're going to give you the shot, right? And this was also a site where there were pharmaceutical company incentives. So we have a very large presence of pharmaceutical companies. But anyway, we had the Zika crisis. We've had many young people who have left because there's no work here. The majority of work is like working in retail, or working in the entertainment industry, or working in tourism. And like 80% of people under the age of 25 are earning minimum wage. And of course, the best jobs that you can have are being a friend of someone in government, because then you get like $100,000 job, and you're getting money that doesn't, like for the Department of Education, for example, teachers don't make enough money, but the heads of offices do make a lot of money. We had the two hurricanes in 2017, which was Irma and Maria. They were two Category 5 hurricanes. Irma took a left or a right turn at the last minute, but it did affect Loíza. It affected Vieques and Culebra, which are island municipalities. There are people who did not have electricity after Irma, and 2 weeks later, Maria formed. And Maria, even though they say it was a Category 4, I think it entered as a Category 5, and some of the gusts were there, and we were devastated. And the first time that I had heard the term IYCFE, which is Infant and Young Child Feeding in Emergency, was actually the summer before Irma and Maria. And I sometimes think that was like destiny, because as I had gained that information, because I also tell this to anybody who's working in the birth field or in justice field, apply for all of the scholarships, apply for all of the fellowships, go to all of the conferences, get information, because you're going to get connections with people who you will be able to collaborate with in the future. You will gain more knowledge. So I got a scholarship to a conference where I met some Canadians who said, hey, come work on this initiative with us. And all of a sudden, I'm like, we were doing online education about Hurricanes Harvey and I don't remember the other one that was happening at the time. And I was learning more about it when all of a sudden Irma was coming to affect us. So after Irma, I was one of the lucky people. I got my electricity within 2 months of the power outage. And that's another thing. And I think I'm just going to insert right here the thing about Roundup again, which is that our electric power authority is our collateral to some vulture bankers who put some bonds out for our national debt, which was probably acquired through corruption, but also has never been audited. And if you know what the Jones Act is, the Jones Act means that any goods that are imported to anything out of the 48 contiguous United States has to originate from a U.S. port. So in the case of Hawaii, in the case of Alaska, in the case of Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, even though we're closer to Dominican Republic and Venezuela, and we can't get anything directly from those countries, they have to send them to Florida and then come to us, that our debt is actually equivalent to the amount of money that we would have saved if the Jones Act didn't exist. And after Hurricane Maria, the Jones Act was only lifted by Mr. Trump, who was the president at the time, for 10 days. And many of us didn't have food stability for months. My supermarket, the closest to my house, when it opened 3 weeks after the hurricane, smelled of death. And I would go several days a week to see what was new on the shelves, and there was nothing new on the shelves. And at one point, we literally thought that we were going to die. We weren't going to die, although many people did die, and they even underestimated the amounts of deaths. Our electric authority has not gained, and it was sold to private companies who are not investing in the maintenance of the power grid. They're using all of the income from our power authority to pay these vultures who have a debt, some of whom bought them after the hurricane at like 1% of their current value and are expecting 100% of the money back. And so we have the highest power bill of any jurisdiction in the United States and the worst electricity. Don't be surprised. I'm actually surprised that my internet is working well and that my power hasn't gone out during this presentation, because last Friday I didn't have water for 24 hours. The power goes out all the time, and they're not even doing like the tree cutting and the you have to do maintenance of the plants in order to keep the power authority. They're talking about spraying Roundup again in order to try to assure our power. So the hurricanes, while in the 2019 and 2020, late 2019 and 2020, we had a series of devastating earthquakes, which ironically most devastated the parts of the island that were least affected by the hurricanes. And then as we were still in the recovery stage from the earthquakes, then we had the pandemic. We had the lockdown. We also had the formula crisis here. And since April, every day on my phone, when I wake up in the morning, there is an extreme heat advisory. And it's already September. And we are a few days away, like 2 days ago, I think was the anniversary of Irma. And we're a few days away from the anniversary of Maria, and not unlike, and we've had other hurricanes since as well. And so we are just living a constant economic and climate crisis. And we have one of the highest preeclampsia rates in the US. We do have the highest C-section rate. We're already at 51% cesarean birth rate. We have had a loss of specialized healthcare providers. I think right now there are only 80 obstetricians on the island. For example, I can tell you stories about trying to get a neurologist for my children and how many months it took me to do that. And it was only because my pediatrician knew somebody who would send them a text message. They got me an appointment. That's how we do everything here. People who are working, such as birth workers, we're part of this creative economy because I don't want to work at the movie theater. And sometimes I don't get paid enough. I still am a Medicaid recipient, even though I am considered an expert in my field. That's just part of what we do. So I see, just to say really quickly, we started in 2017 to address these economic disparities. And even though our focus was on IYCFE, we realized we're birth workers. So we have expanded into this whole 1,000 days. The 1,000 days is from the moment of conception until the child is 2 years old. So we work with formula. If you work with breastfeeding, you have to work with formula. And we can talk later about how devastating commercial infant milks are to the environment from how we are raising the cows. They are used to create the milk instead of just taking it out of our own bodies. And that we could be investing more in milk banking, that we could be investing in, because it's not just, I know that I believe in body autonomy and not everybody can breastfeed or chest feed. But if the alternative is not to feed from your own body, why is not human milk another alternative? Why is it dehydrated cow's milk or dehydrated soy that is in a can and dehydrated and then put on a boat or put in a truck that is taken to the store so that you take it home, and then you have to reconstitute it and feed it to your child in a plastic bottle, and then the trash. So I guess this is really multi-layered, but what we are trying to do is we realize we have to stop expecting people to come to us. We are training people in communities to be the experts. We now have an online training certification in Spanish that uses non-binary and inclusive language. We have a community-based doula program now out of ASI. So we are just trying to expand our services, and we really see this as a food justice, because Puerto Rico is also, people used to call it food desert. It's now being called food apartheid. We are subject to food apartheid. We have very little local farming. ASI has been working on a collaborative with women farmers so that they become lactation specialists so that they can work at the agricultural fairs and can talk to people about growing your own food, about eating healthier during pregnancy and during the 1,000 days. So it's just a very, this is a water justice issue, and I could go on and on. So I think I went over my time, but to understand that birth work is food justice, it is climate justice, it is body justice, and if we want, even if we're not alive, to have great grandchildren and to have great great grandchildren live um, in to their fullest extent, we have to think about what we're doing right now.
Ashe, ashe is what I have to say about I see is ashe. I always learn so much when you speak, and whenever I get the opportunity, you never go over time with me. I always give Lourdes the floor because if there is something that's so powerful, is awareness, it's resources, and collaboration. And because of these multi-layered challenges, anyone tuning in right now, anyone on this panel, anyone who's going to watch this in archive will have that opportunity to now be aware, to be able to round up, well, I shouldn't use that term, but to collect and get together resources, including the resources that I see has developed for families, and to collaborate. And so if we're not aware of those problems, we can't address them. And so I'm always so grateful, not only to hear about solutions that ASI has already brought to families, but the direction, the growth, and this, the resilience of this beautiful island of Puerto Rico that I hope everyone learned something. And if not, rewind the tape because you weren't listening. Let me pass it on to Tiana to talk a little bit about the work of BWWLA and everything else that you do.
Sure. Thank you so much. I will, well, first I'll talk a little bit about my background. So I am a Southern girl. I grew up all over the South, but my family is originally from Charleston, South Carolina. And I moved to Los Angeles to go to school at USC. And so my introduction into the world of environmental justice came from looking back at my family's history and looking back at how I grew up. And I think in the US, when people think about racism, they often do look historically instead of presently or at systemic issues. So they think about Confederate flags, they think about old slave markets, they think about things that I did see growing up that were physical reminders of our country's history of the forced and enslaved labor of Black bodies. And I think as important as it is to look that way, it's so important to see the ways in which the same white supremacy, the same racism that allowed for those atrocities, that actually created those atrocities, are still creating harm in a myriad of other ways that people might say is invisible, but are definitely not invisible to the people that are experiencing the harm. And so when you're in a city, any city in this, or even just in the rural areas in this country or really around the world, and you look at the communities that have trees and the communities that don't have trees, the communities that have a highway mowing through them and the communities that don't, the communities that have access to healthcare facilities, prenatal care, postnatal care, the communities that have resources, the communities that were disinvested in and that had abundant resources. When you look at these realities, you see environmental racism. You see that the people who are experiencing the most harm across a myriad of issue areas are Black and brown people, are BIPOC people. And then you see all of the threads that connect these truths, redlining, and policies around housing and other realities. And so at Black Women for Wellness, we really do try to embody the intersectionality of the reproductive justice framework. And the piece of the framework, which is that all people have a right to exist in a safe and healthy environment, even though that right is not currently being actualized, especially for BIPOC people globally, is why we have an environmental justice program. And our environmental justice program, and we also do work in maternal and infant health. We have a robust civic engagement program, who are our people that are constantly in the streets at events, meeting people where they are, knocking on doors, doing phone banking, voter engagement. We have a C4, which is our branch that does direct policy engagement for reproductive freedom in California. And on their environmental justice team, it's really based on the reality that Black women, girls, femmes, and gender expansive peoples are truly overexposed and underprotected from toxins and toxics, both within their built environment and in personal care products that are very largely marketed towards Black women and girls. And so this reality that there is an overwhelming amount of environmental hazards that are affecting Black women and girls, and also the reality that we see such high rates of reproductive health harm among Black bodies when it comes to high rates of uterine fibroids. Why are there high rates of breast cancer, more extreme forms of breast cancer? Some of these questions, and we see that some of these missing links might be the overtoxic exposure as it relates to health and well-being. And in Los Angeles, when we're talking about environmental hazards, people often again look at California and they see California as this like at least it pertains itself as this environmental state, this state that has all these environmental laws. But actually, 5 of the 10 cities with some of the worst air quality in the country are in California, and part of that is because California is an oil drilling state. We have some of the worst law regulations around oil drilling, and in Los Angeles, we have the largest urban oil field in the entire country resides in a very Black community. It's 1,000 acres of sprawling oil fields that are right here in Los Angeles County. And we also have oil drills in a lot of other communities across the state. And we have refinement, we have transportation harm. And so I think when we are talking about burden, when we are talking about hazards, we can look at communities, our community in South Los Angeles and across the state, and we can trace a lot of what those harms might be. And then we're talking about personal care products and toxic chemicals. So overall, there are about 10,000 chemicals that are used in personal care products, about 4,000 just for fragrance. Then when we talk about plastics, which are what a lot of these products are contained in, there's about 16,000 chemicals under the category of plastics chemicals. And we have extremely little health data on the majority of those chemicals because the way that the chemical industry has been allowed to exist and the beauty industry has been allowed to exist is that we are all, especially Black folks, are guinea pigs in that a chemical for an ingredient for a product is allowed to be put in that product. And then it requires an immense amount of people saying, hey, this thing is harming me. And then it requires the ivory tower to do the research stamps before anything might happen at often a regulatory level. So to emphasize that, I mentioned 10,000 chemicals used in personal care products. The US only regulates or bans 11 of those 10,000. When we look at the EU, the European Union, for them, it's about 2,400. So there's just severe lack of regulation. And I think a lot of people just think if you're going to a grocery store, if you're going wherever to buy a product, then the product is probably relatively safe because it's on the grocery shelves. And that's just not the case. That's just not at all true. Same with bottled. We have a water program. So the comment made about water said, yes, it's like, oh, well, I'm buying this bottled water, which is exorbitantly more expensive than tap water. It must be safe. When we also know that there are over 300 chemicals in one PET plastic bottle, which is the common plastic bottle when people are drinking bottled water. And there have been studies that have found that about half of them, 150 of those chemicals, can leach into the product, especially if the product has been heated. So we know that there is this overwhelming amount of toxic exposure that people are facing. And we also know that according to national biomonitoring data, Black women have higher levels of beauty product related chemicals in our bodies compared to a lot of other demographics. And the question is, why is that? Well, it's because of systemic racism and Eurocentric beauty standards that say that both on a cultural level, in order to be beautiful, you have to have lighter, brighter skin, you have to straighten your hair. And then on a policy level, it is still allowed in many states in this country and federally hair discrimination to say you cannot get this job, you cannot advance in your career, you cannot graduate, you cannot walk at graduation, you cannot go to prom if you have dreads, if you have braids, if you have big bold curls. So which means that we have both this regulatory system that does not protect folks, unsurprising, and then we also have all of these cultural and also policy-based realities that mean that Black people often have so much more toxic exposure from personal care products and beauty care. And there are more and more linkages to the health harms like breast cancer, uterine cancer, and ovarian cancer. So at Black Women for Wellness, when it comes to like advocating, what really is important for us is kind of, in my world, kind of twofold. So one is everything is grassroots up. Everything is community centered. So as it relates to the oil drilling work, we are actually right now in the largest urban oil field in the country. Over the last 2 years, we've knocked on over 26,000 doors, which are people directly surrounding the oil field. And we've talked to over 5,000 people and asked directly, like, what are your experiences? What have you been feeling? How do you feel about having this hazard in your community, and what do you want it to be next? And we're applying for funds to do like deep engagement around what folks want the land to become, so that we don't have the toxic violence of oil drilling or the toxic violence of another hazard replaced with the violence that is displacement and gentrification, which we so often see when communities fight to clean up their communities, to get rid of a hazard, to plant more trees. We see prices go up, and that community that fought hard for their roots gets shoved to another community. And so keeping that from happening, but also knowing that we all deserve to live in safe, clean environments. So one is like really meeting people where they are and making all advocacy, all efforts grassroots up. And then on the beauty care side, a lot of it has been to kind of like play the game as it relates to getting more data on how our people are being harmed. So we participated in studies with academic partners at Columbia and Occidental to understand personal care product use habits among Black and Latine women across the state, and have utilized that data to do policy change work in California, and then also education. And then utilizing the structures that we know work. So earlier, I loved what was shared about how if you know that you as a birth worker are a trusted person, that is such an important bond and such a special bond. And we also know that families are another one of those bonds. And community is one of those bonds. So we have a program called Pearls and Conversations, which is about bringing folks together and building those bonds. And so when we're talking about like healthy hair care, different hairstyles, your hair history, we call it your hair story, then those are the things that make people feel like I'm interested and I love myself and I love my hair and I love my body and I love who I am and I love my story. And therefore, I want to lean more into some of the other options that there might be. But then we also recognize overall that none of this is our fault, that while we have a right to know how we are being harmed, how we are being affected, and my job and Black Women's Wellness and so many of us have a responsibility to share this information and a love at sharing that information. At the end of the day, it is government, corporate. We need structural change in order so that people can trust the products on the shelves, so that people aren't worried about hazards in their communities. So people can raise their families in safe and healthy communities. And then also, I think another piece, whether it's the oil drilling work or the personal care product work, I always say, sometimes when I do presentations to folks, I always say we try to build the presentation in a way, of course, that's fun and interactive, but it's a lot of sad information. I think sometimes we live in a culture right now where it's like very cool to be woke, very cool to like be aware. But when you're the person that's being harmed by whatever the thing is that you're learning, it's hard. It's a burden to carry information that says this thing that I thought was really fun, buying makeup, doing my friend's hair, getting my nails done, can actually be hurting me. That's hard to hear and that's hard to know, in addition to all the other things that we have to think about and worry about. So I think it's also important to really do that, not radical imagining. Dr. Ruha Benjamin talks about like radical imagination and seeing the world that you want to exist. And when we have done some of those questionings, what do you want this field to become? What does beauty look like to you? What is beauty justice? Sometimes we talk to folks, and I've had this too, where you are become so used to having to be pragmatic, so used to having to be realistic, that the answers might be, I don't know if it'll ever get there. I don't know what's really possible. I don't know what can really happen. And so even like fostering that ability and fostering that work with friends, with community, with our families, with our mothers, with the people that we care about, with our mentors, that ability to genuinely imagine and see the future that you want physically in your environment, what it looks like for your kids to be playing and safe, what it feels like to trust that when you turn on your tap, there's water coming out that's not going to harm your family. To really imagine that, and then we can work to get there. But if we can't see it, if we don't have in our mind's eye that we do have a human right to water, you do have a human right to be safe, you do have a human right to reproductive health, you have a right to have a child, a right to not have a child. That believing in that and seeing that in our mind's eye is such an important part of community-based advocacy. And I have learned so much doing it in the last many years. And I think that as we are moving forward, as we are, have question marks about the future, but also excitement about the future, I think it's just all the more important for all, and I mentioned this earlier, that we are working in tandem and working at the intersections of all the many, many issues that we're talking about. Because today, we're talking about environmental justice, climate justice, reproductive justice, and birth work, but we could also be talking about housing, and we could be talking about criminal justice. And we could be talking about other intersections as well. And when we really are working at the roots of these things, then that's where we see the change happen. And I see that at the community level, I see that at a policy level. But most importantly, I see that and I'm excited about what's coming in the future.
Thank you so much for those comments. And I'm so glad that everything I'm glad that you said, but when you said the part about, folks who are living, who are telling the story that is their story, I always feel uh, uncomfortable sometimes when I want to call on you all, call on Lourdes, call on Shantae. I'm like, oh, come speak at this panel. But I'm like, am I re-triggering, my sister? Am I re-traumatizing my sister who wants to talk about, challenges and victories and bring awareness? But there is that, that point of when she logs off, her experience is very different than when I log off, right? And so I'm so glad you shared that because, that ties in the community-based research component that I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Smith on is, this is our real life. This is not trapped in the ivory tower. This is not something that's happening over there, and this is what I'm doing over here. These are stories, but that radical imagination and that optimism and that the solutions that can bring us there is why we wake up every day and do this work. And so let me pass it on to Dr. Smith, all the way from the motherland, to share a little bit about her work in this equity research and science and reproductive justice and everything she does, because she does know.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for everyone sharing information. That is a lot of what I have to share today. I think as mentioned earlier, it's a lot to know the research and also be the person being impacted, but the ability to share, make connections, make plans, and collaboration really cannot be said enough. I think, especially for me as a researcher, I might have my doctorates of public health, but most of the people in my community, or even just my parents, don't have their high school diploma. But I don't think that makes them any less or more smart than me. I think that we have our different experiences and different ways to share our education. Something that Tiana mentioned earlier that I wanted to expound upon is endocrine disrupting chemicals. So when you hear endocrine, just go ahead and clue in your brain to say hormone. And hormone is literally just a way for your body to send chemicals to like send a message. Like if you're sending a text, like if your brain had to send a text to your liver and be like, yeah, girl, I need you to do this to process that, then that is what our endocrine system is for. So for instance, if you go to an endocrinologist, you might be looking at your PCOS, or you might be looking at insulin resistance, because insulin is one of the hormones that help us regulate our blood sugar. So, to that effect, as mentioned earlier, unfortunately, there are what we call endocrine disrupting chemicals inside of our personal products, our water supply, our air, and things of that nature. And they unfortunately obstruct the proper functioning of like our natural hormones. So, for instance, sometimes they can mimic or even deceiving the body into treating them like actual hormones, because your body unfortunately sometimes can't tell that, oh, that chemical is foreign and it's not like a hormone that I've produced. So to that effect, I wanted to provide some tips and tricks on how to reduce EDC exposure, but also talk about how they specifically impact people for perinatal health, right? So EDCs pose a serious risk for pregnant women because hormones are more unstable and vulnerable to these toxic chemicals because of the status of being pregnant. And they can also increase pregnancy complications such as your placental formation, intrauterine growth restriction, preterm birth, preeclampsia, and even gestational diabetes, as well as hinder a person's fertility. And that goes for any gender as far as fertility goes. And unfortunately, their effects can also extend to your future generations that we talked about, like possibly having grandkids or descendants from us through an epigenetic mechanism. And so, what I wanted to talk about today was that was kind of mentioned earlier, especially when it comes to like microplastics, the type of things that we package our products in, because maybe the ingredient list is perfectly fine, but the bottle that it's packaged in might be dangerous to our health. So, these things include restricting plastic containers. Labeled number 3, 6, and 7. You'll see like a little triangle. You'll notice a little number in there. Looking at those and wanting to avoid 3, 6, 7. Also, there's a toolkit that I believe I posted on the Hoover app, but definitely can share with you all later. But also consider using a water filter to filter out EDCs, including for hair washing. I know sometimes we think about water when we're ingesting it, but your hair, your scalp is taking in a lot. Consider that. Like you might see people trying to avoid chlorine, for instance, when it comes to our hair. Also, reading labels and avoid using products containing the following chemicals. So, for instance, you might have seen paraben-free makeup when you walk into Sephora, dioxins, triclosan, and something that helps me to do that because I know even though I have my doctorates, I've taken many biology, microbiology classes. Being a chemist is just a whole different ball game. So for me, I love to share resources that help consolidate this information. So I love apps like Yuka, which is YUKA, or Think Dirty. This is not sponsored, just a resource I found. So if you know of others, please let me know. But they're able to let you know what different chemicals are in the product because sometimes it's not completely listed on the ingredients list, or it might just be confusing to you, like what is a dioxin? And then it also gives grades based on their grading system. That you can also contribute to. And then my last thing is avoid using products with fragrances. I know my people with eczema or psoriasis already know this, but products that are labeled no synthetic fragrance or even scented only with essential oils, and even with the essential oils, I tell people to proceed with caution because mint oil might be fine for me, but it may not be fine for you. I really believe in that patch testing. We don't have to put the whole thing in our hair. We could do a little piece and see how it goes for us and really seeing what's appropriate for our body. But yeah, I think as kind of mentioned before, sometimes you really do have to wait on these like white towers to produce this research, to talk about it, to give us funding, to then disseminate that information. But of course, there are things that we can learn from the past and actions, of course, that we can take in the present. And I just really want to impose that on people, especially for people in my research community. Like, if I'm just talking to other people with doctorates, then I'm not doing the work that I need to do. If I can't explain my paper, my abstract, what I'm submitting to a journal, to my mom, to my taxi driver, to anyone out in my community, then I'm not doing the work that I need to do because my work needs to be directly translated and explained and strengthened through my community. I need to be coming up with hypotheses and things like that before I even do my literature review from my community. Is this something that my community finds advantageous? Is this something that will protect their health? And so also one thing I wanted to add, because I'm not sure that we like explicitly mentioned it, but like racism is an environmental health issue. Like your environment is just not also your built environment. There's also your social environment. And I think sometimes that gets left out of environmental justice. Like having highways through your neighborhood is a very unique experience for Black and Brown people in America. Like you can always go to any spot in America and look through a highway and they're lied, most likely, predominantly Black or Brown community. Same is said for like I-95 in South Florida. Those were beautiful homes that they destroyed to build that highway and then have pollution for and then car noise and things like that of that nature. And to always keep that present, because I know sometimes when we think about environmental justice, climate change, environmentalism, it doesn't always look like the people on this panel. And so I really just want to pontificate on that, having that special moment in space, because as you can learn from Zainab and Lourdes, is that the people that are bearing the brunt of climate justice are oftentimes women, oftentimes people, those of lower socioeconomic status, and oftentimes those of the global south. Absolutely, what we do here in America impacts literally the rest of the world because of our political capital and consumer power. And we have to make not only these choices for ourselves, but for our global community. That's it.
I appreciate that. No, that's not it. That's not it. Because I'm gonna spin the block right back to you. I'm so glad that you said, you talked about the research community because, and other people have talked about research, extractive research. There's nothing that I hate more than seeing this research conclusion, this, article published in a high impact journal that I got to pay $3.99.95 to read that supposedly happened down the street from my house, or that supposedly happened in a place that the person never actually came and saw and spoke to anybody. So the fact that you want to that you are doing this work and disrupting what's going on in academia is one of the reasons why I admire you so much and why I was like, girl, come be on this panel. So I'm going to spin it right back to you in our last few minutes. Call to action. You just mentioned two great apps. One of them was yucca, the other one was something about something dirty. So I know you'll say that. But this is our call to action moment where everyone will go around. We have Clearia as another one, and Tiana can speak more to that. We're going to go around real quick so that everyone can share resources, any community announcements, or anything that you'd like folks to tune into coming up in the next few months or days or weeks, and how they can find you on social media. So we'll go in reverse order, starting with Dr. Smith, and then next will be Tiana.
Thank you. You should be able to find me by typing in my name, Desiree Shante Smith. Um, Funny enough, there is another Desiree Smith that works in public health. Last I checked, she was at the Maryland Department of Health, and I used to get her emails or she would get mine. So I'm Desiree Shante Smith, or Desiree S. Smith, and then Shante is SHANTAI. On LinkedIn, you should be able to find me, and then any research or articles and things like that of that nature. What do I have going on right now? I don't really have anything external. I've been doing quite a bit of internal work. I am in Nairobi, Kenya. If anything I had to share about that is literally learning about how different climate change and climate crisis things are impacting those in the global south. I really, really want to emphasize that. Like, it's great to know what's going on in your own backyard, but you need to check out your neighbors as well. And then what else can you all look forward from me? Oh, my toolkit. That's what I did want to share with you all. So the toolkit name, make sure I get this right. It's called The Main Issue. I had worked previously as a program and evaluation manager with Girl Plus Environment, a really awesome environmental justice organization. They're based out of Atlanta, but they have a national agenda. You can look them up on girlplusenvironment.org. And then if you go under the main issue, there is one called The Main Issue Protecting Our Bodies. And it just gives a really cute little flyer that you can download, share, send the link to your friends, just to talk about EDCs, what they are, what their different names might be, because I know we mentioned literally thousands of chemicals, and then how you best can avoid them. And of course, if you have any questions or anything like that, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I think I check that at least once a week. And yeah, just looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and to be in company today. In terms of resources, kind of piggybacking off of some that were shared, one thing we always get asked is kind of like, well, if these products aren't great, what can we use? And so we did research on this and found that like the majority clean, green, natural, that doesn't really mean much. So unfortunately, flipping the label and reading is helpful, but even that sometimes doesn't include everything. And so there is something called the Black Beauty Project. It's through Breast Cancer Prevention Partners. There is a database of Black-owned brands that have been, all of the ingredients that they use have gone through what's called their red list of chemicals of concern. And so if you're really looking for specific brands to support and that have safe products, like safe ingredients, then you can go to the Black Beauty Project. That's another resource. Otherwise, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or my email. I can put in the chat here if anyone wants to reach out via email. And otherwise, on our website, bwwla.org, we have a lot of resources from everything related to oil drilling, the life cycle of plastics pollution, water equity, especially if you're in LA. We produced a South LA drinking guide, a tap water drinking guide, which includes history of California water nationally, some of the water crisis, as well as a lot of resources for folks, including like affordability programs, how to pick out a water filter if you're interested, tap water versus bottled water. So that's also on our website. And then we also do produce reports and everything, and that's all there as well. Again, bwwla.org. Otherwise, again, please continue being company. Reach out if you ever want to connect. And it's been really, really incredible to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go Shantae, Lourdes, and then Z.
So I'm like, what all do I have going on? Educational wise, I do have a 45-hour lactation course. So it is centered in the barriers for Black and Brown families. So if anybody would like to take the course, there's more information about it on yolobreastfeeding.org. I don't have the new dates up right now because I just closed a scholarship that I had opened, and so I didn't want to put the dates up until like people who have to pay for the course or sliding scales before I went through the whole scholarship application things. Besides that, I'm contracted with the Michigan Breastfeeding Network as the education manager. I'm happy to see the folks that when I was in Chicago, I'm like, I got to get with y'all so y'all can be presenters for sure. Like, because I'm like, we got to get more of this out to the people. So, yes, I'll be creeping in y'all emails after this today. And besides that, just trying to keep the work moving. You can find me on YOLO Breastfeeding on Facebook. So it's YOLO Breastfeeding. And then on Instagram is YOLO.breastfeeding. So I would love to keep in touch.
I'm going to jump in. It's my turn, right? Because I know we have very few minutes. My advice to everybody is live your life the way that you always live your life, but it is everything season. It right now is hurricane season, but it's also in the South. It is blizzard season. It is earthquake season. It is global thermonuclear war season. It is migration season. So this is happening all the time. Make sure you always have at least half a tank of gas in your car. Get all of these things that we know that actually get recycled, but we have to buy. I used to think my mother-in-law was nuts because she would get these little jars and she would fill them up with water and she would have them all over the house. She knew. So if you have leftover like bleach containers, collect your water in there. Make just have things. If you can do a home garden, do your home garden. If you're breastfeeding, don't forget that your best, most powerful expression tool are your hands. I can't tell you how many families I would go visit who couldn't get baby to latch. And you have to empty your breast. And I'd be like, are you pumping it? They'd be like, yeah, at night when we turn on the generator. No, you can do it during the day, even if you don't have the generator. So because if the apocalypse comes, it's not going to be like The Walking Dead that you just go up to the gas pump and turn it on because you need diesel for that to work. So just live your life, but try to remember that when things get bad, your best tool will be your ability to live without technology to some extent. And then ASI, which is Alimentación Segura Infantil. I'm going to drop some links in the chat. We have us on social media. It's ASI_IYCF, Infinite Young Child Feeding. Our page is ASI-IYCF.org. I am Lourdes Santavalla. I am on LinkedIn. I don't check it that much, but I get notifications. I'm on Instagram as IBCLC Puerto Rico. We have an online training program. We have a series of webinars that we did on food justice and security. They were in Spanish, but we had simultaneous translation, and it has continuing education credits for lactation SERPs. So those will be on our pages as well. If you want 8 credits in lactation or in ethics, that comes up. And again, like I said, apply for all the scholarships, all of the fellowships, and attend all of the conferences. Oh, and I have a podcast. I'll drop that too. It's in Spanish.
To practice my Spanish, I'll be tuning in. Okay, I'm gonna drop a couple of things in the chat. My email is zainabjaw11@gmail.com. I also have a link tree that I created along with some partners. It's linktree/doulas and climate. I want to uplift Birthmark doulas. I know I talked about them earlier. This is their shirt, and hold space that there's a tropical storm hurricane that's going to be making landfall in Texas and Louisiana. And they're doing incredible work. They already sent out an email of emergency preparedness to help folks think through like what they need to prepare, what conversations they can have with their providers, things they need to pack. So they're doing the work. And they also have a convening coming up called Black Birth Matters, which I put the link for the registration there as well. I tried to make that very fast. Please connect with me on LinkedIn, Zainab Jah. Yes.
And thank you so much, Zee. And I will wrap it up with the National Association to Advance Black Birth has put out the updated new version of the Black Birthing Bill of Rights. And so please go to the NAB.org to download that, whether you are an expectant parent, a member of someone's support system, or of course a birth worker, or you're someone who does advocacy and policy to ensure that you are uplifting the rights of people of color. I also, because this is a symposium, want to give a shout out to Shamel Levine. She will be speaking virtually today at 1:30. So please, if you are on Whova, tag session 2C, environmental justice, goods movement and port safety, hidden dangerous, sustainable solutions. She is advocating, she's the chief operating officer of Rise St. James in Louisiana, which many people know as Cancer Alley. And she has a phenomenal story to tell, as well as approaches and solutions to get big gas, big oil, big petro out of Louisiana and to stop killing our families and our future generations. So with that, I want to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone tuned in. Please share this video widely and most importantly, connect with these community organizations and those in your backyard. Thank you so much for tuning in to the 10th annual EJ Symposium, and we look forward to connecting with you all. Register to vote, and take good care of yourself.